it has not been the easiest process in the world, but I realized that was a little negative and I didn't want to be negative. And so it's just really how we have as a division begun to look at leadership development across the board. And first off, that this is very much a work in progress and very much based on, I think, dynamic and intentional conversations, which we continue to have here in the division, but also what I am looking forward to sharing this information with you guys, because y'all are fellow leadership educators. You have y'all have the expertise, the vision, the interest, and I'm hoping that you can really help build this with us and give us some ideas of things that we might want to be doing to think about this a little differently in different ways. So with that, I am going to be sharing just some of the challenges and opportunities that we've had in the last few years to even approach this topic of how do we develop common leadership competencies across a division of student affairs, talk a bit about the process that we have been going through, where we are in that process, and then talk about our next steps. So with that, I am going to move into, I think, what some of our challenges are. When I came to Kennesaw State University, it was 1997. We had only been a university for about a year. In fact, we are relatively young. We've only been an institution since 1963. I'm happy to say I'm older than the college I work for. That's a little depressing. Well, anyway, moving on. When I came here in 97, we had just under 14,000 students. And we now have over 42,000 students on this campus. That has been one of the challenges of Kennesaw State University, is the rapid growth that we have had through the years. Add to that the fact that we consolidated with Southern Polytechnic State University back in around 2013, 14, and had to bring in two very different universities, different ways in which they ran, the different focus in terms of what they were teaching, and pull that together. And that was all part of a statewide initiative to reduce the number of state universities in our area. Add to that the fact that we have had a lot of turnover in leadership and in staff over the past 10 years. And we know that creates a lot of challenges for some continuity, but it also creates opportunities, right? And then I think one of the biggest challenges we've had, and I'm wondering how many of y'all would have experienced this, we just sometimes had too many cooks in the kitchen, and nobody was working from the same recipe. Everyone felt like we can all do leadership development. We're all going to do it our way. And we don't need you and we don't need each other. And we were just working way, way, way too much in silos from a university perspective, but very much within the division. And that was probably one of the biggest challenges. I think Ryan can remember some of those struggles that we would have, and how do we begin to connect with other areas, even in our own division, to help build leadership capacities for our students. So those were the challenges, but you know what? I don't like a challenge. I turn a challenge into an opportunity. So the opportunities that I have seen just in the last 4 to 5 years is that we now have division leaders who are really committed to collaborative leadership development. And we have people in our division, a lot of them young, energetic, dynamic professionals who just have a passion for leadership development and who are bringing in a lot of great resources to frame our work. When we have these conversations, the conversations are very dynamic because we're talking some of the same ideas and principles. And I want to just really give credit to, I think, a lot of our master's programs out there in student affairs, because we're beginning to teach from some common learning outcomes and consistent messages that we want our student affairs practitioners to have. And, if you think about my generation, we were all coming into student affairs from so many different arenas. I mean, I came from the counseling background, so I love that we're beginning to have some common language within the profession itself. And then I think the real big opportunity was just this increased conversation that we began to have over the division. So I want to talk a little bit about how we got organized with this. And Anybody who knows me knows that I just absolutely love and thrive off coffee and conversation. Let's get a cup of coffee, let's have a conversation, and let's just begin to talk about what's going on, what can we work together on, how can we build partnerships, how can we build work together. And so I began just reaching out to people. And a lot of this ended up kind of being virtual because all of this is happening just right before COVID hit and then during COVID. But I said, I'm not stopping this. Dadgummit, I'll figure out how to use Zoom and Teams and all of these, and we'll just start having some conversations. And so what was the cool thing was I realized that as I'm having conversations with some of the different people in the division, they were also having conversations. So we had these pockets of conversations going on. And I'm going, we need to get together here. We need to unify this and bring this together. So with the blessing of the upline, my senior associate vice president, who I report to, she gave us the blessing, said, create a task force, put something together, send it to senior leadership. We'll take a look at it and see what we think. So that's what we did. I pulled together a group of like 7 or 8 people, and we started talking about what we wanted. What would it look like if we developed a common language that revolved around student development for the students in the division to help them when they leave? What is it that we want them to have? What do we want their arsenal to be made up of so that they can be contributing citizens in their careers, in their communities, and in their personal lives? So we worked together for a couple of months to put together a proposal. And I'm going to go through what the goals are. And as I go through the goals, I decided, let me go ahead and share with you what we did within each of those goals and then tell you where we are. So I'm just going to lay this out as it happened. Goal number 1, we thought, okay, if we want to look at leadership development across the division, we kind of need to know what people are already doing. Let's just start with, where are we right now? And so we did this in 2 different ways. First, we surveyed departments in the division just to find out who's doing the work, who's doing any kind of leadership development in any capacity. We kept it very, very broad. We included student assistants in that conversation, just anything that they were doing, whether it was an event, whether it was a program, whether it was a class, just whatever. And then we took that information, pulled it together, and decided, well, we need more information than just this. Let's interview these departments. Let's have coffee and conversation. Let's sit down and talk with them. And that was probably some of the most fun I had in this whole process. We divided into teams of 2. We went into the different departments. We have about 13, 14 different departments in the division who actually indicated they do some level of leadership development. So we interviewed those departments to learn the specifics. What are the programs? What do they look like? How long are they? What are your learning outcomes? What kinds of things do you do? What are you hoping that your students will leave with, et cetera? Are you measuring this? And for most of them, to be real honest, they weren't measuring this. They weren't even closing the loop to find out if students were getting the leadership. They were just doing it and hoping it was sticking. And we know that happens. So we're going, okay, we see the need, we see the opportunity, and we've already got some great work going, and we didn't want to lose that work. So the next thing we wanted to do was really analyze the data that we got from the interviews. Now, I would like to stop for a second and just say, we did not set this up as a full-blown, do it exactly right kind of research project. We did not get IRB approval for this because we said this is something that's internal. If we have to do that later. So when we analyze the data, I'm saying we analyze the data, but we did not really systematically analyze the data. What we did was, each one of us who did the interviews, we had taken notes. We had taken very copious notes during those interviews. And then we began to just look for themes. What are we seeing? What are we seeing that our colleagues are accomplishing in leadership development that might help us when we think about a common language? One of the main things that we did not want to do is we did not want to create work for someone. We did not want we did not want people in the division to go, oh, no, 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 I'm not doing that. You're just trying to force more work on me. We wanted to take what they're doing and just make it bigger and better for them. So looking at this data and analyzing it, we want to determine the optimal models and competencies to create a common language. And that was our goal. Let's create a common language that we can use and that we can measure across the division. Now, it was really probably one of the things that bogged us down is because there's so many different models out there. We didn't want to create our own model. We were going, there's some incredible work out there. So how do we use that incredible work, and how do we then to develop it within the scope of who we are and what we do? And one of our wonderful young colleagues, just adore him dearly. He comes in with 7 different, he's got the relational leadership model, he's got social change, he's got NACE, he's got CAS, he's got everything. And I'm going, okay, let's not use all of these. We're going to make ourselves crazy if we try to use all of these. So we began to, in the general conversation, in our visioning and our brainstorming, we determined, and I think we were very drawn to just certain models that kept coming to the top. And the 2 that kept coming to the top were Corey C. Miller's learning leadership competencies and CAS standards. Those 2 just became kind of the driving force. And then one of my other leadership educator colleagues in the division, we have both been very influenced by the social change model. So we knew that we were bringing that thinking and those ideas of self, others, and community into that conversation. So as a result, what we ended up with were, we determined 3 pillars that we wanted to focus on for leadership development. Self-discovery, which is probably my passion area. I'm going to be really honest, because I come from that counseling background, and I am so drawn to that internal leadership. Who are we as leaders? The values and strengths and ideals that we bring to the table. So self-discovery. And then the second pillar was developing talent. And then the third pillar is creating impact. And these are pillars that we saw in the programs within the division that already exist. So we decided, okay, how do we begin to look at this and determine some competencies that might fit? And this is where we used Corey C. Miller's outstanding work, and we began to determine, based on all of the groupings that we saw in the themes for the areas that are already doing this work in our university, in our division. So when we look at self-discovery, we look at identity, values, talents, and strengths. We identified for ourselves that personal values, reflection, responsibility for personal behavior, self-development, and motivation were going to be the competencies that we would be looking at as a division. And then you see the corresponding CAS standard that these different competencies fall into. This was self-discovery. I want to go through all of those and then tell you a little bit more about kind of what we're thinking with these. When we look at developing talent to build strong relationships, we began looking at, we're thinking written and verbal communication, problem solving, decision-making, conflict negotiation, productive relationships, and collaboration. These are the competencies that we're looking at under developing talent. Again, all of these competencies we were seeing as general themes throughout the division. And then we looked at creating impact to affect lived experiences. And so creating impact, looking at social responsibility, other circumstances, service, and social justice. So these were the 3 pillars and the different leadership competencies. One thing that we know, and I'll probably say this again, but one thing that we know is that we're going to be testing these and really looking to see if these competencies really do make sense across the division. So we'll be looking at this in our annual report and going, how many of these competencies did we actually engage in as a division? And at what level were we working within these competencies? Do they make sense? Do we need to drop them? Do we need to add others? So knowing that all of this is very, very much an organic process. So, and then just wanted to give credit where credit is due to the incredible work that the Council for the Advancement of Standards in Higher Education does, and the work that Corey Seemiller has done. So moving on, I know I'm giving y'all a lot. I hope y'all are just writing down the questions that you want to ask and the suggestions and ideas. But moving on, goal 3 is to embed leadership language in existing programs and create a common measurement tool. This is where we are right now. This is, we just got the approval in the last month from senior leadership to go forth and to begin to look at how are we going to use this language. And y'all, I think the biggest challenge that I keep talking to the committee about and that we keep talking to each other about is, how are we going to do this and get buy-in? How are we going to get the buy-in from our colleagues who are already doing the work? They're going to go, why are you making us do this? So we're starting small. I think we're starting small, and I think we're starting smart. So what we have done is we're creating a pilot group, 2 or 3 different programs. There is an Engaged Our Leaders program out of our student leadership and service department, our student assistance, which is a big thing that my colleague Jessica McLeod is working on. And then we're going to do something with our outdoor leadership, experiential leadership students. And we're going to use those as pilot programs to see just how this would work. And in order to do that, we developed kind of just a case study template. And from that template, we thought what we probably ought to do is meet individually with people and begin to create, and we created some guiding questions just so we, again, doing this from that, this is a conversation that we're having. How do we do this from a conversational perspective? So we developed guiding questions for the pilot programs. Now you're going to see the first ones of these are just pretty standard, purpose, target audience, length, just some of the topics that they discuss, the activities that are done, and then we go into the developmental level. And this is something that we think is extremely critical, knowing that if you look at any of these competencies, they can be taught or encouraged or practiced at varying levels. So we said, so if we wanted to look at foundational, intermediate, and advanced levels of leadership development, what would that mean? So we took Bloom's language and we used some of Comavez's language from her leader identity development model, and we developed our own definitions of what we are going to consider foundational, intermediate, and advanced. So you see the Bloom's languages all through there. Recall, identify, and explain for foundational, apply to new situations, draw conclusions for intermediate, and then take that stand, justify a decision, and work together to develop new initiatives. So each one of our leadership initiatives, we want to look at and go, is this a foundational program? Is this an intermediate? Or is this an advanced? And then from that, they can develop their primary learning outcome, and looking at a very easy way for them to do that. As a result of this program, the audience will do this behavior to this degree, and just giving them just a very easy way to begin to do that. The last part of this work with these pilot groups is using our competencies chart to determine and help them determine when they are looking at their initiative, and we are going to ask them initially, pick one. Don't think we're not going to measure every single leadership competency you're doing. We will slowly add. We want this to be a win-win for everyone, so let's start with one. Now, and if somebody wants to really do 2, that's great. We'll do that, but let's start with 1 and see where we go, and then we can continue to add as needed. So the first thing is they're looking at what is it they really, really want the students to get out of this? Which pillar does it fall into? Is it self-discovery? Is it developing talent? Is it creating impact? And then which competency under that pillar do they really want to focus on? Is it decision-making? And if it's decision-making, what is the level of competency that they want the students to get? Is it foundational? Do they just want to understand what decision making is? Or do they want them to actually apply decision making into some particular situation? And then we want to talk to them about what learning tools they're going to use. This might be activities, it might be experiences, reflection, whatever they're using. We want them to identify those learning tools and then to identify how they're going to measure that learning based on the level of learning that they want. So ultimately, what's going to happen is we're going to be collecting all of this information as we build this out, and we're going to be learning about the different measurement tools. We might be guiding some people and encouraging some different ways, but ultimately we'll want to create a toolkit that can help people just put things together in a very, very easy way. But kind of jumping ahead, before I go into that, I do want to talk about the final two goals that we have not started yet that we will be doing. And the final two goals from that original task force is to measure student engagement. And we're going to use our student engagement software platform called Our Life to do that, and then create intentional ways that we can help students be able to articulate their learning. And we'll be reaching out to other areas. We'll be reaching out to academic areas, reaching out to our career planning and development folks to help. But we want to find a way in which we can help them articulate that learning, because ultimately we want them to be taking this with them in whatever way they go, wherever they go. So our next steps, very slowly embed these competencies into the existing programs throughout the division. And I'm just so glad we have our senior leaders who are just very excited and are supporting us in this. And then create those tools to evaluate the level of learning, and then track the competencies that are used consistently throughout the division, and then track our student progress and our engagement for our students. And then we want to build that toolkit that I was talking about, a toolkit that has it's just a way, it's like a form that they can use to build out. This is how we are approaching leadership development from this perspective, the competencies we're using, and then the ways that we're going to be measuring that information, with the ultimate goal that this is going to be part of the division annual report. Now, I am very strategic in who I invited to be on this committee. And one of the members of this committee runs our assessment for the division. And she is all over this and super excited about how are we going to integrate and put this as part of our annual report. And I think it is there that we're really going to be able to gather that data and that information so that we can see, okay, which competencies did we touch this year? Which ones did we not? Which ones might we be able to integrate next year? Are there competencies that are actually going on in our division that we need to be addressing that are not right now in this? So I just feel like I have just talked a streak, and I hope I haven't put you all to sleep, or I hope you enjoyed your peanut butter and jelly while I talked. But I realize, again, this is a work in progress. We are figuring it out as we go. And thank you guys so much for watching and listening. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if I can figure out how. Okay. So, okay, y'all all look shell-shocked.
Happy to start. I can start a conversation. First, thank you so much for putting this together for us and for sharing just your wisdom and experience in building this at your institution. I'm from University of Florida, so my name is Taylor Stokes, and I serve as an associate director in our Brown Center for Leadership and Service. And we're I think, Judy, it was helpful to hear you because we are in line in a lot of what you've been doing, and we are about all the way up to the point, except for implementation, right? And so we are at that phase where we had with the previous administration had a lot of buy-in. Now we're having to get buy-in with the new senior leadership. But one question that I had that has come up in a lot of our listening tour interviews was student employment and how that comes into leadership. We chose to separate those two, right? But student employment is a huge leadership opportunity, as some departments see that as their main leadership opportunity. And so I'm just wondering how you address that. I'm sure it came up. I know you kind of briefly mentioned student assistance in your presentation,
Yes.
But how you navigated that conversation.
Yes, we very intentionally included student assistants in our leadership development. And Jessica, get ready. I'm about to pick on you to give me your thoughts, because Jessica, my colleague Jessica McLeod is with us today, and she's just got incredible ideas on how you build leadership capacities within student assistants. But we were having separate conversations while we were doing this conversation in leadership development. We were having separate conversations on how do we create better training for our student assistants in the division. And I was on both committees going, okay, guys, I think this could all dovetail real beautifully. And then Jessica came on board in July, and I asked her if she would take that student assistant piece and begin to do that. Jessica, can you address a little bit about your philosophy of how you're approaching your work with student assistants from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually a really big passion point of mine that goes back to my own time as a student leader in undergrad. But I think that student assistants are student leaders who just have to work and make money, because we all know that we do not pay them a competitive amount of money, especially compared to places like Target, who even just started tuition reimbursement, or Chick-fil-A, who will send them to a leadership academy and give them scholarships. You know, they're working for $8, $9 an hour here with us because they're craving some kind of elevated experience that they can't get somewhere else, right? And so I think when we approach leadership development for student assistants through that lens, it can kind of reframe what we're doing. And so along with that, everything I do is very long-term and applicable. So in our student assistant programming, for example, it's kind of half operational, half professional leadership development, and it's all kind of intertwined together. But we really use Bloom's taxonomy to make sure that they're getting to that space where they can apply the knowledge. So we might be doing like some work with Drew Dudley's everyday leadership. But then we take it a step further and we go, okay, so how can you apply that today as your job as a desk assistant? Like, how is every interaction that you're having with a student, a parent, someone touring, how is that an opportunity for you to practice everyday leadership and make an impact on somebody's life? And then we take it one step farther and we say, okay, now when you go into your career field, and we work on a STEM focused campus. So, you know, I have a lot of like mechatronics majors. I don't know what mechatronics is, but I know that at some point they're going to have to lead a team. So we say, okay, now how can you apply this even further into a mechatronics field in that setting? And so we have found a lot of success in that. And it helps us too, because it helps with student assistant retention rates. If they feel like they are getting an elevated experience, they're a lot more likely to come back. And so we are actually in the process right now of creating that kind of second scaffold for our returning students, so that they're getting even more leadership development the longer they're with us, and elevated opportunities to practice that. That may have been a tangent and not answered your question, but thanks for letting me talk.
So Jessica, can I ask a follow-up question on
Yeah, absolutely.
Who's actually doing the leadership development with the student assistants? Is it their supervisor? Is it a side track program that a one-off that they're doing, or?
That is such a great question. So the way that it currently is, because we're in the pilot stages, is that we actually have this training living in an online setting. So it was built out of the training for our student center employees, because there was one supervisor for about 120 students across 2 centers. And so she was finding that she really wasn't having time to coach them or get this information out to them, because whenever she could get them in one place at one time, it had to be very operational. This is how you open the doors at 12 o'clock. This is how you do this. So there was no room for that interpersonal development. So that's when Judy and her kind of got together and created this online platform that gave her and Judy, and then now me, the opportunity to go in and facilitate discussion posts, conversations, quizzes to really see where students are at. And that allows the supervisor or myself or Judy to really pinpoint, okay, This was a section on professionalism, and this student just butchered their discussion post. Like, they did not get it. And we compare that with, okay, there has been like one complaint about this student. Let's give them a little special attention. Let's pull them in. We are in the process of hopefully over the next couple of years moving this division wide. So that's a really great question. And that will be by making this kind of a customizable program with a base platform. So the operational stuff will be able to be customized. And then myself and Judy and the other leadership educators at the university will be able to help people tailor the specific program to their students' needs. That's a great question.
Yeah. We are going to be embedding, now that we have these competencies, we're going to be embedding them into the student leadership development training. We just are not, we're figuring out how that might work. Because that group is just a lot more comprehensive than maybe a one-off program that another area might be doing. So those are going to be some of the challenges that we have ahead. Ryan, you had a question. How long did it take the group to settle on the frameworks that you did? Was it a challenging process? Oh my God. Requiring some shared learning first, or did everyone come to the table ready to contribute and make a decision? Oh, wow. See, I can always depend on you, can't I, dear? And you know the conversations we used to have. I mean, we could spend hours and hours and hours and not come to any decision. I think this was why it was the trials and tribulations, because this part of it was such a challenge. And not everybody at the table was actually what I would call a leadership educator from the understanding of the knowledge and theory. And they just had, the kind of that practice, everyday kind of living practice when it comes to leadership. So this is where I did a lot of model the way and inspire a shared vision and just strong. I'm older than all of y'all. I'm going to influence this a little bit. I mean, that sounds horrible. That's not exactly as bad as it was, but I really did make my case for 3 pillars that focused on self, others, and community. I kept kind of bringing that back to, okay, guys, let's not recreate something that is already a wonderful foundational start. And then in terms of deciding on the 3 pillars, that really was a very beautiful organic process that I think somebody would have an idea and someone else would tweet, and then another person said, oh, well, here's a nice definition. And then, to be really honest, I went into the data and I started looking at what competencies make the most sense based on C. Miller's work, because I knew her work better than anyone else. And so I don't know that I'm answering your question. I mean, some of it is organic, some of it is pushing an agenda, to be really, really honest. But I felt like my agenda was grounded in evidence-based work. I wasn't making up my own stuff. I'm using the work of people that I respect and admire. And I know that their work has stood the test of time, so. And I mean, you're the one who introduced me to C. Miller in the first place.
Thanks.
So I'm blaming you.
Yeah, that's really helpful to understand, because I've seen this attempted kind of work across different institutions, and I've more often than not, I've just seen it get bogged down. And so I think it's helpful to understand just how you were able to help move it forward with coming to the table with kind of a vision of what it should be like.
Yeah.
Hey, Judy, this is Bruce Jackson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I do Zoom presentations every week, and we tried every which way to get in, and we couldn't get in via video. So I had maybe a question and observation. Maybe this is something for a broader conversation. I'd love to know how everyone is approaching how they are consulting with their campuses with regards to identifying various competencies. And, I run our C. Charles Jackson Foundation. We help fund leadership centers and programs all over the country.
Yes.
And we have started this online portal. And our approach was to take CMILR 60 and then aggregate those competencies with about 12 other corporate frameworks and then boil it down. And we've boiled it down to about 125 behaviorally based skill areas and have used that as a base to begin building competency-based asynchronous courses with discussion guides, so that various folks, student affairs leaders on campus, can work division by division to identify what skills and competencies are appropriate for, because we know there's core, and then there's STEM-based, law, business, engineering, et cetera, or education. And we've done some integrations now at a couple of universities, and it provides a way for student affairs to really be a consultative entity for various academic and co-curricular kind of programs on campuses. So I'm curious of how folks in student affairs now, or leadership center folks, are approaching their engagement with a broader campus. And there's maybe lots of questions in here. We're trying to run a focus group on some of these things here coming up. And I posted yesterday on the ALE about a paid focus group. But I guess I'm trying to better understand how folks are, because I just got in about 7 minutes ago and I didn't hear the first section of it, but are people primarily using CMILR as a way to map out competencies by division and then start to help build out, or are folks trying to build out a more centralized framework that they then have to go kind of sell to the broader campus? Or do you go to, whether it's an engineering or business school, and say, I can custom tailor or help you identify competencies, and then we as a center can help facilitate those or help you engage in those? I just don't know if it's more of a universal approach or much of a customized approach based on what part of the campus you're engaging with.
Yeah, one of your day-long workshops, I think in Minneapolis, back quite a few years ago.
So.
Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it too. I remember. So, gosh, thanks for joining in on the conversation. When we began our process of determining what we wanted to do, I had to look first at what can we control, and basically, we have a level of control in student affairs. I had the buy-in from senior leadership. I knew that we were going to be able to get things done. I've got the buy-in from enough people around the division. They're invested and want to be a part of this. When we begin to look outside at at the academic units, it does become a little trickier. I know y'all aren't surprised. I approach everything from a let's build a relationship kind of perspective. Let's build some relationships. So when I moved from the Kennesaw campus, which is our campus that houses 30-something thousand of our students, and then I came down to the Marietta campus, which houses our College of Engineering, our College of Computing Science, and our College of Architecture and Construction Management. I was asked to come down to Marietta so that I could really focus in on the Marietta student and what are the needs of the Marietta student. Very different student body than what we have on our Kennesaw campus. And I realized very quickly that I needed to build relationships within the academic areas, because that's where students are connected. Students aren't really connected with clubs and organizations. They are connected within their careers. So I have been very successful in working with the College of Architecture and Construction Management, and have actually, with their associate dean, built a leadership development curriculum that we go in and we go into classes at strategic points in their time. We have workshops that we're doing within their student success headquarters. And then Jessica and I are committed to leadership coaching. We know that's where leadership development really, really can happen, is when we're in those individual one-on-one or small group settings. So Jessica goes in and works with the student organization, executive board, small group leadership teams. And I go in and do a lot with the classes. Now, Bruce, when I introduced this in the beginning, and I was using C. Miller's work to introduce this, and I had even used her work to identify which competencies that the businesses, that architecture and construction companies are looking for in their graduates. When I went in, she did not engage with that language. It did not make sense to her. She was lost. So what I had to do was back up and let her give me the language she wanted to use. And then I translated it to the language that I know. But I use her language. I use her language because if I try to push a C. Miller word, she's just going to be lost, And then she kept saying something, and I'd go, and I think to myself, well, that's what I've been saying all along. Oh, great, let me use her word. And so that's what. And so I do think it becomes very tailored. I have not made the inroads with engineering and computing science that I want to. I think what I've got to do is we've got to show some success with architecture and construction management. And then I think we're going to have the inroads with the other academic areas.
I love that story because I had the same experience when I was at the university. And this is the really interesting moment. When I go and meet dean by dean, chair by chair, share what leadership, the certificate program or whatever you're doing can be supportive. You have a dean that says, listen, my pre-med students have no electives, no time, they can't participate in the lecture series, they can't participate in all of that. And then I go and identify 22% of my full-time certificate students are pre-med students. I pull them aside and say, why are you doing this? Because your dean says you don't have time or energy for this. And they said, who are you kidding? When was the last time you looked at a med school application? In fact, most of us are staying an extra semester to complete the leadership certificate because we have to demonstrate emotional intelligence, rapport building, listening. And the deans didn't even understand the qualitative and soft skill competencies required. Now, GPA and MCAT is only the necessary but insufficient condition. You now have to bring very clearly a co-curricular understanding of, what skills are you bringing to your grad school or your internship or your job, right? I think what you just said was great, which is you just better align the language of a competency to the language your deans and chairs are speaking. Well, so that's a big part of it.
And another thing that helped me with getting in with the architecture and construction management college was that they had gotten dinged in their latest accrediting round by saying you need more leadership development in your curriculum. And so when they found out that I was on that campus, they just, we need help. We don't know how to do this. And so I was able to take advantage of a situation in a sense that they saw this need. And that is how the associate dean is approaching this, is we need to meet this criteria. But what I do love about these people is it's not just to meet a criteria, it's to create a better experience for their students. And so their heart is definitely there. And we're having a really, really great time. It's taken 2 or 3 years to get it off the ground, but this is our first year that we're really full blown into the first 2 years. We will be adding leadership components into the 3rd and 4th and 5th year for architecture students.
Well, excellent. Well, I know there's there's probably questions, and Judy, I'll reach out to you. Then for those who are interested, we've just spent the last 4 years and about $1.4 million building out 42 of these competencies in asynchronous courses. And we are seeking to better understand how student affairs and leadership educators can leverage online courses with discussion guides and spend less time redesigning competency-based elements and focus more on program design. So we're doing a paid focus group here. So check anybody who's interested in participating in that. It'll be a 3-hour commitment. We're paying like $200 to help us better understand the nature of how we consult on campuses, and where does some of the online resources, how can they be leveraging what you're already doing? So anyway, I'll give you a call on that.
Great, thanks. Would love to. Other questions, suggestions, comments, maybe something that someone's doing that we could all learn from?
Judy, I have a question for you. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Mark.
All right, thank you. So I am the coordinator of student athlete success at the University of Mount Union. And so a part of my job description is leadership development. And so I have taken control, or just trying to organize our student athlete advisory committee, so SAC. And so through this, I have kind of like a 3-step service project kind of initiative. So it will be student involvement. So things that they do for each other, playing by each other, which is like attending games or setting up games within like the home basketball game or this game. Then I have their own certain project initiatives that they are interested in, which is like community help, different things. One of my students wants to do a student athlete career fair at the middle school and high school, kind of some battered women's shelter things, and also like youth sports camps and clinics. And then we have an initiative that will be kind of us providing service and help to our I'm sure every center, every campus has a place that has community outreach and different things of that nature. So we'll be paired with them. So saying that to say, I have a question about research and leadership development research. So what I'm doing with them is a 2-part series. So I am also an intern at Walsh here in North Canton, Ohio. So I'm an intern for student affairs and higher education with the counseling and human development background as well. So with that being said, I will be doing research on these students. And I wanted to know if you or anybody on the panel had any experience gathering leadership information, kind of like research. So in my mind, I want to do this by posing questions, so the main thing that I'm trying to get at is, what do the students at the University of Mount Union feel that Mount Union should be providing them in terms of leadership development? So I want to assess the gap between what students feel they need to know when exiting this versus what the university is providing them. And I have to go through our mission statement. So I kind of have to go through that, maybe get some ideas from the president on what he believes that the mission statement fully means. So I have some sort of central purpose guiding this research. But my question to you all is, I have an idea to do like a focus group setting in order to pose these questions, or should I kind of like split them up in halves? Should I do surveys? I feel like surveys is not like quite the most defined way. Like I can get a general idea, but I don't think that's the best idea. So Judy, have you ever, participated in anything of this nature?
Maybe not to the level that you're talking about. I think I want to open this up to other people on the call, and because I'd be interested to see how others might answer that question.
Does all that make sense? I'm sorry if I was rambling or speaking too fast, guys.
I think if you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, were you talking about doing like a research study for potential write-up and publication later? Is that what you're intending, or just for assessment purposes?
So it would be for assessment purposes. So there's 2 parts of this. So one part is me, Mark, the intern, who has to do internship hours in running a research assessment. Then there is Mark, who is the coordinator of student athlete success, who it is a part of my job description to provide leadership development. So in a sense, I'm almost doing research for myself in order to kind of figure out what programs I can specifically implement that is kind of tailored by the words of the students, pairing the mission statement into that some way.
Yeah, I think my first action would be, and see if anyone else has other thoughts, was to see if you can partner with faculty members or assessment groups from your institution and see what their insight is. They'll obviously have the context and the understanding of your specific institution and programming. I think it sounds like an amazing opportunity and a really good project. But I would love probably to bring people in that have some additional context. I don't know if you have like a leadership PhD or master's program, or if there's, other groups or sports management or, things of that nature that could probably be really great assets for you.
Yeah, we do actually. So we have a leadership minor. And so there's 3 people who teach our leadership minor, and one of those is my internship advisor. So, I've kind of always had this idea of what they think of leadership, but I don't know if it's necessarily being implemented in a way that is developing leadership, turning it into a disposition or a lifestyle. That's kind of like what programs will instill that, so it's 2 parts. Is how will I gather this data for this research, and then in turn, what programs can I exactly instill to kind of bring out these skills? But yes, Taylor, I appreciate that. I think speaking with those, even outside of who is involved with leadership, but more so kind of like the presidents and the vice presidents and deans, who wants to see these students leave in a certain way.